acrylic paint, and I'm going to paint all over that primer, covering it completely. Because we've used the primer before, we can paint this acrylic paint on the glass. If you don't have that primer on first, acrylic paint just painted on glass has a tendency to want to peel right off. Now I've got some bubble wrap, and I'm just painting on some black acrylic paint, and then I'm going to roll that bottle into that plastic wrap, and it's going to create this great texture on this bottle. Now the black is dry. We're going to go in and we're going to add some yellow. And again, I'm just going to paint right on this bubble wrap. It doesn't matter if it mixes in a little bit. We're just trying to create some texture, some different looking paint on this bottle. And again, just roll it in. This is just something just to have fun with. And of course, at Halloween, the more grubby and the more spooky, the better it is. Now let's get our label ready for this bottle. I'm using Home Sweet Haunted Home coffee mixture again. We're going to age it, and I'm going to put a little bit of acrylic paint in this one. I've used that yellow, and I just think it's just going to add a nice tint to that paper, and just sponge it on, and it just darkened up that coffee stain and gave it, I think it's going to blend in really nice with that bottle. I had some of that coffee and paint mixture left over, so I'm just dabbing it onto the bottle. We're going to set it aside and let it dry. And now we're going to add that Mod Podge to the back of that label and attach it to the glass. Now we're going to seal it all up again. We're taking that Mod Podge mat and we're going over the entire bottle. Now, I thought it needed a little bit more of an embellishment on it, so I had this pressed daisy in from my garden this summer that I used on my flower press, and I'm coating it with some Mod Podge matte so it's not going to fall apart, and we're going to let it dry. And I had this tin that I am going to spray with some matte spray paint. Now let's pull this all together. I've got a piece of ribbon that I'm going to hot glue around the neck of the bottle. And we're going to take that daisy, put a little bit of hot glue on the back of it, and attach it to the top of that bottle. And then we're going to take that tin that I spray painted black. I'm going to use some E6000, and I'm going to put it around the neck of that glass bottle. And then we're going to attach that tin into that E6000. I like to add a little bit of hot glue. It also helps it secure so it doesn't move around as much while it's curing. And we're going to set it aside and let it dry. And this is what we've created. This block of wood was actually found at the dump, and it just needed to be freshened up. I'm giving it a coat of my black homemade chalk paint, and I'm going to ding it and notch it with my hammer to make it look old and vintage and rustic. The candle was from the thrift store, and the little dish was also picked up at the thrift store. We're going to pull this all together and make some spectacular Halloween decor. I want to give this piece of wood a really kind of grainy texture. So I've just taken some wood glue and some water, a 1-to-1 ratio, and I'm going to stir it up really well, and then I'm going to paint that whole block of wood. One of my favorite things to do when I'm DIYing is to take new or wood that just looks like it's not aged and give it a painting technique and transform it so it looks like it's 100 years old. Now I've just got some sand, and while that glue mixture is still wet, I'm sprinkling that sand into it. And this is going to give this block of wood a really Halloween vintage spooky feel. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to brush off all of that loose sand that's not bonded into that glue. And then I'm going to go in with a sandpaper and I'm going to distress it on the corners and the edges wherever it would have naturally aged. And this works perfect. This is a really great way to age your DIY projects really quickly and affordably. Now I'm going to seal it all up with a little bit more of that water and glue mixture, covering that whole pedestal. While we're waiting for that to dry, I made a homemade napkin. Now, I have a full tutorial on how to make homemade napkins, and this graphic is available in my Etsy store if you want to try this technique. I picked up this candle at the thrift store because it already looked spooky and Halloweenish, if that's a word, Halloweenish. And we are going to put this homemade napkin into the napkin. We're going to bond it right into the wax. I'm covering this with wax paper, making sure that the waxy side is on the inside. We're going to take our heat gun and we're going to heat up that homemade napkin until we can see the wax seep through into it, and it is going to mold right into that candle. Now, this candle was 50 cents at the thrift store, and I'm so glad that I was able to upcycle it and make it spooky. We're going to peel away that wax paper, and as you can see, how fabulous is this technique. I've done this lots with napkins for every occasion, and they always turn out perfect. Now, let's do this blood dripping technique. These are candles that I found at the thrift store. They're just a red candle. Now, you have to make sure when you're looking for red candles that it's red wax all the way through. Sometimes I just have a red coating on the outside. Or you could also use crayons. If you take a red crayon and you take the wrapper off of it, you can also do this technique too. Light your candle and then also light the red candle and just let the wax drip wherever it wants to drip. It gives that eerie Halloween feel. Let it drop along that napkin, around the back. Let it pool wherever it wants to go so you can have that natural kind of blood dripping effect. Our wooden pillar has completely dried. I love the way that it looks, but I thought it needed a little bit more. So I had these old drawer pulls. They were left outside, I think, all winter. They've got a really neat patina on them. I'm gonna drill them onto the front of that wooden pillar, and it kind of gives that Gothic feel. And I'm glad that I was able to use these up because otherwise I would have ended up in the dump. I'm just pressing the back of those handles into the wood so I can see where the screw hole would have been, and then just pressing them in. They fit perfect. Now I want these to be a little bit more secure, so I'm getting out my E6000. I'm going to put a little bit in each of those holes and then put those handles in and let them dry completely. Now that yellow glass dish, I didn't want it to be yellow. I wanted it to look a little bit eerie. So I took it out and I sprayed the back of it with some black spray paint. Worked perfect. It's going to look fantastic for this DIY. Adding some E6000 onto the bottom, and then I'm going to secure it on the top of that pillar. I'm going to add a few beads of hot glue. I find that helps keep it in place so it doesn't wiggle around while the E6000 is drying. And then to finish it off, I want to add a little bit of moss around the edge of that glass dish. I'm just using some hot glue, and I had some moss that I picked up at the dollar store. Kind of finishes off that spooky feel, and I'm adding it all around the outside. I love using things from the thrift store or things that I find for free and turning them into holiday decor. I think they just look much more original, and they don't just look like it's something that you bought at the dollar store. I love the way that this turned out. I think it's really spooky, and it's going to fit in fantastic with my Halloween decor. I'm going to paint this with my black homemade chalk paint. And I'm going to use some Vaseline around the edge this time instead of the wax. This gives a really nice distressed look also. Just put it anywhere where you would want it to look naturally aged. And then I had some green acrylic paint that I added right on top. Now it's really important to take these extra steps to make these pieces of wood look authentic and different than just painting them a solid color, because this will make them sell better. And then I'm adding a little bit more Vaseline again. I've put on some orange chalk paint that I had, and then I put on some yellow acrylic paint. You can mix and match this paint for this technique and it works fabulous. Wiping off wherever there was Vaseline, and I'm exposing those colors underneath to give a really chippy look. And we're going to turn this into a shelf sitter. I've taken this outside and I've really aggressively sanded it with an 80 grit sandpaper to finish it off. Now again, we're going to use that same process to put graphics on this shelf sitter. I've printed this graphic off on my laser jet printer. You can also use an inkjet, and we're going to put just a light coat of Mod Podge matte completely over that graphic, and then put it on the block of wood and let it sit overnight. And then we're going to take a damp rag the next day, just dampen it so you can just start to see the letters show through, and then rub off the paper and then seal it up with polyacrylic sealer. And if you don't have any polyacrylic sealer, you can also just seal it up with the Mod Podge. Going to add a little bit of twine to the top and tie it in a nice knot. Another thing that I like to do is when I'm at the thrift store and it's summertime, but I am finding fall and Christmas theme embellishments, I always pick them up because they're probably cheaper, tuck them away so I can bring them out during that season and use them on my DIY projects. And I've just picked up these bottles at the thrift store, but I have seen these at the dollar store too. You just want to make sure that you're going to have a bottle that has a cork or a screw top. We're going to use these graphics that are available in my Etsy store, and they make really great labels for bottles for Halloween. I've mixed up some of my coffee stain. It's just instant coffee and water, and I'm going to dab it all over these labels to give it that aged vintage look. I have them completely dried. I'm going to take my hair dryer and I'm going to dry that piece of paper. You can also use a heat gun if you have that handy. And then I'm going to cut them out to fit our glass bottles. I'm doing 2 bottles today, but I'll use a third graphic on another Halloween project, and these come all 3 on one sheet when you grab them out of my Etsy store. Now that the edges are freshly cut, I want to age them a little bit, so I've got my ink and a little dabber, and I'm going to go all around the outside of that label. I could have also used the coffee stain, so if you don't have any of this type of ink, you can use that to age around the edges. I'm trying to achieve a really grubby looking label, and I think this is working really well to get that look. Before I decoupage, this is a step that I like to do. I'm going to take my Mod Podge matte and I'm going to put a coat over the top of both of the labels that I'm going to be using. This is also really great to do if you're using an inkjet printer so your ink doesn't run. This is a laser printed graphic, so I don't have that issue, but I just like the way that it looks also. It just kind of gives it that matte finish. Now comes the fun part. We are going to make some potion for our bottles. You want to grab some alcohol. I picked this up at the dollar store, and I've got a little funnel, and I'm going to fill it bottle up until it's almost to the top. And then I'm going to get out my food coloring. This is gel food coloring. You can also use liquid, and I'm going to use the green. I've got a little skewer. I'm going to put some of that food coloring on the skewer, put it into the bottle, swirl it around, and that alcohol is going to turn that lovely green color that we're looking for. Just add as much food coloring as you want until you get the desired look that you're trying to achieve. Now we're going to use mica powder. I picked this up at Michael's, but I've also sometimes seen it at the dollar store. You can get it on Amazon. I'm probably adding about 2 tablespoons by the time I'm all finished to get the desired look. Once you have all that mica powder in that alcohol, shake it up, and as you're shaking it, you're going to see it swirl and cloud and look like this magical potion. And then when we put the label on the bottle, it's going to be such a great addition to our Halloween decor. Now before we put the label on, I'm going to make this look a little bit more vintage and antique. I'm going to take my dollar store twine and I'm going to add it along the neck of the bottle, and I'm just looped it at the top, so after we've finished putting the twine on that we want, we can pull it through the loop and tighten it up, and then you don't have a knot showing in your neck of your bottle. If you can see what I'm doing here, and then I'm going to take that bottom piece of string and pull on it. It's going to pull it in nice and tight, and then you can cut off the little ends, and it's attached to the bottle really well. Now, I didn't like the silver color. I wanted it to look more aged. So I'm going to add some of that Mod Podge matte, and then I am going to grab some cinnamon. The cinnamon's going to give that metal, that rusty look. It's kind of messy, but I'm just going to sprinkle it into that wet Mod Podge and then let it dry. And it's just going to take away from that really stark metal look. Now we're ready to put the label on. I'm going to get the Mod Podge matte, and I'm going to go right out to the very edges and attach it where I want it on that bottle. You could also put a Christmas twist on this technique, do some red food coloring, and add a Santa label. Great idea. Old glue sticks that I've had in my stash for quite a while and haven't used them on a project yet, and I thought it would be great to use on this. I didn't like that plastic white look at the top, so I'm melting that hot glue and just letting it flow over top, almost so it looks like it's been waxed. And I think that's going to finish this bottle off really nicely. It's rustic, it's fun. Now let's do our second bottle. I've already put the twine on the top. I've aged it with the cinnamon. I've added the label, but this time we're going to use hand sanitizer. I picked this up at the dollar store. It was $4, I think, for this great big huge container. I've got my funnel, and I'm just going to fill up that bottle. This will also work with clear hair gel if you can't get your hands on any hand sanitizer, or you already have some hair gel in your stash. I picked up these plastic spiders at the dollar store. I'm going to use the black ones, and all you do for this technique is I'm going to take a skewer and I'm going to press these spiders into the bottle, place them where I want them in this hand sanitizer, and the hand sanitizer keeps them suspended wherever you put them, so it looks like we have a whole jar full of spiders that is full of venom. Now, I used the same skewer that I put the green food coloring in with, and you can see it's kind of tinting that hand sanitizer a little bit, but that's okay. I like the look of that. So here is our two finished bottles that are so spooky looking. I think they'd be fantastic to add to your Halloween decor, and so much fun for kids or even adults to put together. Green acrylic paint, and I'm going to brush it on that entire bottle. And again, if we're using acrylic paint, because we've painted that glass bottle with that primer, it's going to stick really well. Don't try to paint glass just with acrylic paint. It's just going to peel off. Now, while that acrylic paint is still wet, I got out my instant coffee, and I'm just sprinkling it into that acrylic paint while it's wet, and as it dries, it's going to kind of spread, and it looks fantastic. We got our label, and I really liked when I mixed that paint in with the coffee stain the last time, so I'm adding some of that green into this one, painting over this label. Again, it's in my Etsy store. I have a whole Halloween bundle if you want to grab all of these graphics for some of your projects, and I'm putting that Mod Podge on top. We're going to set it aside and let it dry. Now we're ready to put the Mod Podge on the back and attach it to our bottle and finish it off with some embellishments. This is air dry clay that I picked up at our Dollarama, and I find that it works really well. I'm just rolling it out until it's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and then I'm going to cover a glass jar that I've primed with some spray paint, and we're going to wrap it around and then just mold it all over that entire jar. And I had to add a little bit of clay here and there to get it completely covered. And it doesn't have to be smooth. We actually don't want to have it smooth. I've got it completely covered over that glass jar. I set it aside, let it dry overnight. Now don't panic, because when this dries, this cracks, but that's what we want. So now we've got some toilet paper, and I'm just going to decoupage that toilet paper onto that jar over top of those cracks. That's going to reinforce it so it'll all stay together really well. You can use paper towel, toilet paper, or even some tissue paper. I've printed this graphic off on my LaserJet printer, and I'm just going to use my ruler and just rip around the edges. I find using this type of a ruler, it gives kind of a ragged edge, and that's what I'm looking for this graphic. A little bit of instant coffee and water, and I'm just dabbing it all over that paper so we can give it an antique old feel. Now, while we're waiting for that coffee stain label to dry, I'm just going to use that same sponge with the coffee solution and just sponge it all over top of that toilet paper that we decoupaged on that jar. It's going to give it a really old antique feel, and it's going to seep into all of those cracks and crevices. My coffee stained label is all dry, and I have some of this dye ink, and I'm just going to rub it around that ragged edge of the paper just to give it a little bit more of an aged look. And then we're going to decoupage it right on top of that jar. Just going to put a light amount over that whole label and then center it right where we want it on the jar. And we've taken a glass jar from the recycling bin and upcycled it into a really spooky piece of Halloween decor. A little tip: when you're working with a jar and it's rolling around, grab your lint roller and it'll stick to it and keep it in place while you're working with it on the table. Once I have everything in place, I'm just taking the Mod Podge and putting a light coat over the label and the rest of the jar. I went out to my garden and I looked for some old weeds and some dead flowers to fill it up with. And how easy was this to create a really spooky piece of Halloween decor for your home? I'm taking some discarded stuff out of my recycling bin, and I'm going to transform it into an adorable pumpkin. I've got an old grocery bag that was thrown out and some packing paper. Let's get transforming this. We're going to stuff that plastic bag full of that packing paper, and then I'm going to take my twine and I'm going to start forming it into a pumpkin. And there's no right or wrong way of doing this. Pumpkins are never perfect. So if it looks a little bit wonky and a little bit lumpy here and there, that's okay. We can fix it along the way. Now I'm going to get out my masking tape, and everywhere where I put that twine that formed the pumpkin, I'm going to put the masking tape over top of that twine. And you want to kind of pull it quite tight so it's all snug. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to do each one of those pieces of twine and stuffing the bag in where I need to and smoothing it out. You can also use some painter's tape or some duct tape, just whatever you have in your stash. And we're just going to work away that whole pumpkin, and we're also going to form the top of that stem and just wrap some tape around it also. I want the stem to have a little bit more of a curled form to it, so I'm taking some aluminum foil. I'm going to scrunch it around, and then I can mold it into the shape. I want it to be a little bit twisted, and I'm leaving some at the bottom too, because that's going to be the base of our stem that we're going to paper mache also. So just get creative and form that aluminum foil around the stem. Now we're ready to paper mache. I've got this packing paper and I like to rip it in strips, and I like to have each side of the strip be torn. You don't want to have a straight edge. So I'm just going to rip them up in all kinds of different sizes and shapes. Let's start doing some paper mache. I've mixed together a batch of my paper mache paste, and then you're just going to take your strips and you're just going to lay them every which way on your pumpkin until you have it completely covered. You can overlap it, you can go up and down and sideways. In the end, when we're finished, you want to have 5 or 6 layers of this packing paper pasted on your pumpkin. If you don't put it on thick enough, it's not going to be firm and solid. So I'm going to work away, get this first layer completely on, and then you don't have to wait for it to dry. You can go on and put your second layer on, and then your third layer, and so on until like I said, I like to do 5 or 6 layers. I have all of the layers of paper mache on, and it's already really taking form, and I love it. Now, I like to use a Lazy Susan, and I've got a little vase to prop it up on. As you're paper macheing, it's easier to spin it around and add it than just trying to hang on to it. I let it completely dry. Now I'm gonna flip it over because we haven't done the paper mache on the bottom yet. And I'm gonna go ahead now and put that 5 or 6 layers on the bottom, blending it in with the paper mache strips that we did on the top. And using that Lazy Susan, you can spin it around as you work, and it makes the job much easier. Now I'm using packing paper, but you can also use newspaper, magazine pages, old paper that you're not using anymore. You can rip into strips. You don't need to go out and buy any certain type of paper. Just use what you have in your craft room. And here we are. This is all finished and completely dry. Now I've mixed together some of my paper mache clay. I also have a full tutorial on that if you want to grab that recipe and try this yourself. Now, the reason I'm using the paper mache clay now is it will help smooth out your project, or you can add more details. The nice thing about the clay is you can make it as thin as you want or thicker, and you can use it and mold pieces and add lumps and bumps to your project. This one, I'm just kind of using it to smooth out my pumpkin and make it look more authentic. I'm just using my fingers to get in there and smooth it around. Now I mixed a bit more thicker so I could raise up the stem on the pumpkin, and that's done just by adding a little bit more flour to that paper mache clay recipe. And like I said before, I do have a full tutorial on how to do that, and it'll guide you along a lot easier. Now this is completely dry. It looks really good. I'm really happy with it and solid. We are ready to now sand off any rough little bits and pieces that they might have from that clay. And I know a lot of you are probably saying, well, why didn't you just go to the craft store or the dollar store and just buy a pumpkin? That's a lot easier. But that's not the point of crafting. I find this really relaxing, and I'm creating a product that was taken from the recycling bin and made something new again and repurposed it. And I get a lot of satisfaction from that. And plus, this is adorable when it's all done, and nobody else is gonna have another pumpkin that's gonna look like this one. I've taken it outside and I'm giving it a spray of my matte black spray paint. Once it was dry, I brought it back into my shed. I'm getting out my orange acrylic paint. I've put it back on that little Lazy Susan so I can paint it and spin it around as I go. And I'm just gonna give it one coat of that orange paint, not doing the stem. I'm gonna leave the stem, but the whole body of the pumpkin with this orange acrylic paint. Ready to paint the stem, and I think I'm going to do some green. So I've got the acrylic paint and a little brush, and because I raised the edge of the stem a little bit with that paper mache clay, I'm going to paint right along that edge and then finish off that whole stem. And I really like adding that tin foil into it and giving it that extra shape that it looks like it came off of a vine. I don't want it to have that stark orange look, so I went out to my garden and I grabbed some dirt, and I'm just going to rub it all over this pumpkin, into all the nooks and crannies and the stem, and it's just going to give it that primitive look. And you can also use some cinnamon or some nutmeg or anything that's got a little bit of a darker color just to highlight some of those high edges. And once I was happy with that, I mixed a little bit of acrylic brown paint and water in a dish, and I'm just gonna take a paintbrush and I'm gonna go in all those grooves of the pumpkin and just highlight them so they just pop a little bit. Another nice thing about this project is when it's all done and it's sealed up properly, you can store it away and you can use it year after year, and it can becomes something that's part of your fall or Halloween decor, and such a fantastic craft to do with your kids or your grandkids also. I let it completely dry and then I took it outside, and I'm going to seal it all up with my polyacrylic sealer. This is a matte finish, and of course you can grab a matte or a gloss, whatever you're looking for your project. So root through your recycling bin, get out some plastic bags and some packing paper or newspaper, and create one of these pumpkins yourself. You're going to have a lot of fun with this project. I picked this pillar candle up at the dollar store along with the napkins, and we're going to put the napkin onto that pillar candle. We want to only work with one ply of the napkin. And then once we have it separated, we're going to cut it to size to fit all the way around the candle. And this is another DIY that you can see how versatile it is, and you can do it for all the different seasons. Now you're going to need some wax paper. You want to rip off a piece that's a little bit bigger than the pillar candle, and you want to lay the wax paper down with the wax side facing the candle. We're going to put the napkin all the way around the candle, and then we're going to take the wax paper and we're going to bunch it around that candle and hold it really steady in place. And again, make sure you have that wax side facing in towards the candle. Scrunch it all up so you can hang on to it tight. I like to use a tea towel because it does get a little bit warm because we're going to use our hair dryer, and you don't want to burn your hand, so that just helps out a little bit. Now put your hair dryer on the highest setting and the hottest setting, and just to start melting that wax paper into that napkin and candle, and it's going to bond that napkin right into it. Now be careful because it's going to be a little bit warm, but you'll know that it's all done when the napkin goes transparent. Peel off the wax paper, and you've made a custom candle that looks just gorgeous in the middle of your table. If you've been following along, you know that I never throw any of my glass jars. I like to upcycle them because there's so many ways that you can turn them into beautiful home decor. I've taken the lid off the glass jar, sprayed it with some white spray paint, and now I've got some floral foam. I picked it up at the dollar store. You can always find it in the craft section. I'm putting my lid on top of the floral foam, and I'm just going to cut around it so I can get a piece the same size as the lid. Just carving it down a little bit so it fits on top of that lid really well. I'm just using my hot glue from my hot glue gun, and I'm going to glue that floral foam on top of that lid. When I'm out at the thrift store or at yard sales and I see any bits of faux flowers or dried flowers, I always pick them up, even if they're off season, because I'll tuck them away, because I've saved these throughout the year and I had all kinds of fall theme floral that I could add to this top. I just kind of filled it up until I thought it looked pretty and pushed all of those picks into the floral foam. I want to put a graphic on the front of that glass jar. So I made a homemade napkin. This is a really easy process to do. I printed this off on my printer with one ply of a napkin, and now we're going to do the water method to transfer it onto this glass jar. I love this decoupaging method. It works fantastic and it really eliminates any bubbles and wrinkles. I'm just cutting it off that piece of computer paper, and there's our one ply of our custom napkin. I like to make the edges ragged, so I take a stiff paintbrush and dip it in a little bit of water and then just make that edge ragged all the way around that napkin. So when you do decoupage it onto your project, it just blends in a lot better. And I did this method on a page protector that I picked up at the dollar store. Now you want to make sure that it's facing down on that page protector, and then we're going to just wet it and make sure there's no wrinkles in it. Just kind of use your fingers, or you can use a little bit of a sponge, and just dampen that whole graphic. And then we're going to put some Mod Podge on the glass jar. And you don't need very much, just enough to cover the area where the napkin is going to sit on the glass jar. Then we're going to pick up that page protector and lay it right where we want it. The nice thing about this method is if it's not exactly where you want it, you can pick it up and you can kind of move it around a little bit. Whereas if you were just decoupaging on, once you put it on, it is stuck. I've got it exactly where I want it, and I'm going to start from the middle and just press out any bubbles or any wrinkles, just making sure that it's stuck really well onto that glass jar. And then we're going to peel away that page protector, making sure the napkin is stuck really well. And you have put a graphic onto your glass jar or any project that easy. No bubbles, no wrinkles, works fantastic. We're gonna let it dry completely. I'm gonna seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer, add a really nice ribbon around the neck of it, and then we're going to screw on that top that we put the florals in, and we've created a beautiful piece of fall home decor from a glass jar from the recycling bin. You can also fill this up with goodies and give it as a gift. I just love the way that this one turned out. I'm gonna turn this mason jar that I picked up at the dollar store, it's got the little votive holder into it, into a spooky, fun Halloween candle holder. To do this project, you're gonna need some polyacrylic sealer, just a little dish, just a Tupperware dish, some computer paper, and I picked up this glitter at Dollarama. It was $4, and I love all the assortment of colors in it. I've taken my mason jar down to the sink, washed it with a bunch of hot soapy water, and now I'm going to use one of these alcohol wipes just to clean it off really well, make sure there's no grease or grime left on it. Now we're going to need our polyacrylic sealer. I'm using satin finish. You can use any finish. It doesn't matter which one you're using. And you just want to pour. This stuff is expensive, so you don't want to waste any. So I'm going to put it in a little dish, pour it in, because we want to coat the whole inside of that jar. And you're just going to swirl it around till it's completely covered. I like to hold it over this little dish in case I spill any, because if you know me and you've been following around, I'm not crafting happy unless I'm making a mess. And then when you have it almost swirled, I like to hold it over the jar and dump in the extra into the jar. You want to make sure you get the neck of it all covered too. And I'm just going to hang on to it for a few minutes just to let all the extra drip out, because we don't want it all pooling in the bottom. It's all completely covered on the inside, all the way around. I've dumped the excess that was extra, made sure that it coated the whole thing as I was dumping it out into the polyacrylic jar. We are going to use this orange color. I love it. Looks like a pumpkin. We're just going to take the lid off and just dump it right in to that jar. And I'm going to dump all of it in, because that's probably, we'll use most of it. And then just swirl it around. Swirl it around the bottle. Make sure it's getting into all that polyacrylic sealer and all the little areas. Now I have a piece of paper to catch this extra, because what gets dumped out, we can put back in the bottle and we can use again. I love this color. It's going to make a fantastic looking pumpkin candle holder. Okay, I think I have it pretty covered, pretty good. And then we're just going to set it aside and let it completely dry. Okay, now we're waiting for this to dry. I would like to make a graphic for the front of it with my Cricut, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. Okay, I wanna make a spooky Halloween graphic for this candle holder. So I'm gonna go into Upload. I have a graphic that I made. It says spooky. I'm going to add that to my canvas. And this is available in my Etsy store. If you're interested in purchasing it, you can grab it. Make sure you use the code SAVE50. You get 50% off all of my graphics. And I'm just going to size it. We're in Canada, so it's centimeters. So I'm going to start at 5 centimeters. I think I want it a little bit bigger. So we're just going to pull it a little bit bigger. Now we're going to make it. I'm doing it on a mat because I'm using a scrap piece of vinyl that I had. Going to press done, and then we're going to press continue. Everything looks good, and it's connecting with my Explorer 3, and I am using Smart Vinyl Removable. Click on that, and it's sending all the information to the cutting machine. While we're waiting for this to dry, I'm going to put the graphic on it, and I love this little hack. I just have a lint roller, and I just press my jar exactly where I want it so it's laying flat and it doesn't roll around, and it's easier to put the graphic on. So we're just going to peel off the transfer tape, and we're ready to put it exactly where I want it on the jar. This is such an easy DIY, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't tried the polyacrylic sealer and the glitter on the inside of glass jars, give it a try because it's so cool. You can use so many different colors of glitter. Show you how I tint some of my glass pieces. I want to make these into some fall decor, and you can tint glass, and I've seen it done where you do the inside of jars, and you'll swirl the glue and the dye on the inside, and it creates really beautiful tinted glass. But with these candle holders, you can't get into the middle. These are from the dollar store, and I wanted to make them a nice amber color. So I'm going to show you today how I do it. It's really simple and really easy, and this is what you're going to need to do the project. I always like to put some gloves on because we're going to be working with some food coloring, and it will really stain your hands. A couple little dishes to mix up the this and some Elmer's school glue, and you're just going to need a paintbrush to paint it onto your surfaces. So we're going to get started. This is just a package of food coloring that I bought on Amazon, and it has all the different colors into it, and it was really affordable. So that's what I've picked up, and it just comes in the little containers, and you can mix up, get your color chart out, and you can mix up any color that you want with what they have here. So that's what I'm going to use, and I'm going to use the washable school glue from Elmer's. You can also, if you have the clear, that might work better actually, because we want this to dry clear, but this one does too, and it works perfect. This one came with a brown already, so I don't have to mix it, and I'm just going to do the school glue into the little dish. You just want to mix enough that you're going to use for your project. Probably about a tablespoon. And then I have a little skewer, and I'm just going to scoop out some of this food coloring and add it to that glue until I get the color that I want. And as you can see, it's already mixing up into a really great color. That amber color. So just mix it up really well, and then we're going to add it onto our project. I got it all mixed up, and now we're just ready to paint it onto this glass candlestick. Now I've made sure I've wiped this down really well, and then I took an alcohol pad and made sure there's no grease or grime on it, so this will stick to it really well, and I'm just going to paint it on. Now this has completely dried, and I really love the color of it, but I think I want it a little bit darker. So I'm going to put another coat on it. And with this second coat, I am going to use a sponge. And I think it might get rid of some of those brush lines from the brush, and I can put it on a little bit thicker too, and it'll stay in place. So just doing the second coat with the sponge. Now I have the second coat completely finished, and using that sponge on the second coat covered it a lot better because I could get into all those little nooks and grooves and get it all covered really well. So now we're just going to set it aside and let it dry. Now I'm just starting this second one to match this one, and I've run out, so I'm just going to make a little bit more just to finish up this project. So again, you're just using your school glue and then adding a little bit of the brown food coloring. And then I didn't mix up quite enough in the first batch, so I should be able to get the same color again, pretty close to what I had, so it'll all match really well. And then I'm ready to sponge on some more. Now I found the first coat that I did with the brush, I had a lot of brush streaks, so I'm finding that I'm really liking the sponge to use it. It gives a really kind of textured look to it that I really like. So probably when I do my next project, I would just eliminate using the brush completely and just start you with the sponge right from the start. So I'm just gonna sponge on the second coat onto this one and then let them all dry up. I've got them all done and they're dry, and I love them. and they look like they're old and vintage, and by sponging it on, it gave it kind of a little bit of a textured look, and I'm ready to seal them up. And now I'm ready to start the second project. I'm going to use this mayonnaise jar. I love the shape of it. It has a really nice curve to it, and another one of the dollar store candle holders. And I'm going to do this one in a orange, which I think will look really pretty, and put it all together. So let's get started. I'm going to pour in the school glue, enough to do the whole project. Kind of just eyeball it. There's not really any real measurements for this. You kind of just add until you like the color and pour enough glue in to do your whole project. So I'm just going to stir in the orange food coloring, and it turns into a really nice vibrant orange. I think I want to add a little bit more. And it looks great. And we're ready to put it on our project. And I'm going to start off with this one using the sponge right from the very beginning, because I like the look of that. Now I'm using the gel food coloring, but you can also use the liquid that comes in the little droppers, and it works fine too. I like this one because it's already pre-mixed into a bunch of colors, where if you're buying the drops that is like the 4-pack, then you have to mix your colors together to get the desired color that you want. So I'm just going to start sponging on the candlestick first. First coat's all done, and I love it. And all ready to put a second coat on the candlestick. These are all dry, and I'm ready to seal with some polyacrylic sealer. And look at the texture and the color on these. I just love it. It's fantastic. And the nice thing about this is you could soak this in hot soapy water after the season's done for the fall and redo them over for Christmas, because this is just glue and food coloring, and even putting the polyacrylic on top, it will still soak right off. Now I want to glue these two pieces together like this. So I'm going to use my E6000. It sticks just about everything, and I'm just going to put it on the lip of this candlestick and then center that jar on top of it. And then I'm going to let it sit until tomorrow, and then I'll show you how it turned out. I took the lid outside and spray painted it with some black spray paint. I found this little top off of a spindle, and I think I'm going to use it to put on the top of that mason jar lid, and I'm going to paint it with some green acrylic paint to make it look like a pumpkin stem. I got the spindle all finished, and I made it nice and rustic and chippy, and I'm going to use some E6000 to glue it on top of the lid. I wanted to make some custom candles to go into these. I've done my homemade graphics on napkins, and I'm just going to put it on the candle just like this, and it'll look really nice displayed in it. So I'm going to work away at that. This is such an easy DIY to tint glass with your Elmer school glue and a little bit of food coloring dye. You can also substitute the school glue for Mod Podge, and that also works really well too. But I love the way these turned out. I love the orange textured on this upcycled glass mayonnaise jar and the dollar store candlesticks. Perfect addition. Wine bottles, and take the labels all off, clean them up really well, and then we're going to paint these with my homemade chalk paint. Now, once that chalk paint has dried, we're going to layer on the acrylic paint. Now, you can't put acrylic paint as your base coat. You need to have chalk paint as your base coat, or it will peel off. But once you have the chalk paint down, you can put acrylic paint on top of it. We're creating some candy corn wine bottles. I painted on some yellow and then I went on with the second coat and I used a sponge. It just gives a nice smooth finish. Set that aside and let them dry. I'm doing 3 wine bottles that are candy corn theme. Then we're going to go in with orange on the bottom. Same thing, I'm going to paint on that first coat, let it dry, and then sponge on the second coat, and it gives a really nice finish. And you can also edge around really easy. I'm going to make some hang tags for these bottles. These are just pieces of scrap MDF that I've painted with some chalk paint, and then I printed off my graphics on my LaserJet printer, making sure to reverse the text. We're doing the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, and I've put my Mod Podge mat on the graphics and going to center it right on those tags, set it aside, and let them dry completely. I never throw out any scrap pieces of wood because basically anything can be turned into a little ornament or a little sign. I'm going to add some twine to the neck of that bottle, tie it on nice and tight, and then we're going to add a little bit of a burlap bow. I think that will look nice. I just picked up the burlap at the dollar store. If you accordion fold that burlap, it makes a really pretty bow, just going back and forth and then back and forth, and then just secure it with a piece of twine and attach it to the bottle. It's going to look really cute. You can just tie that piece of jute at the back, and then we're going to hot glue that right onto the bottle. Okay, my tags have sat for 24 hours. I just dampened it with a little bit of water, rubbing off the paper, and the graphics are left on the little tags. I'm going to drill a hole in the top, and then we're going to attach them to the wine bottles with a little bit of jute. I picked up this glass vase at a thrift store. It needs to be really cleaned. I'm going to clean it up, get all the grease and grime off it so it's a nice clean surface, and then I'm going to start to paint it with my black homemade chalk paint. If you are ever painting a glass surface, I find chalk paint adheres the best. I find if I'm using a latex or acrylic, it tends to peel and chip off. First coat has completely dried, and now I'm going to put a second coat on and just apply it over the whole vase. So the next step that I'm going to do, I actually tried this and it didn't really work out all that great. I was hoping it was going to crackle a little bit. So I put Mod Podge over the whole vase, and then I was going to add my white chalk paint on top of it. And as the Mod Podge dried, I was hoping that it was going to crackle, but it didn't very well. So that was kind of a fail. I'm going to go back to the drawing board and see if I can figure out how to get glass to crackle better. If you have any ideas, let me know down in the description, because I thought Mod Podge would crackle. I have lots of luck with the Elmer school glue, but I was out of it, so I tried Mod Podge and it didn't crackle for me. But that was okay because it kind of left kind of a lumpy, bumpy surface on my top coat, and I kind of like that for the Halloween decor. So right here, what I'm doing, I'm just adding a good thick coat of my homemade chalk paint on top of that Mod Podge, and then I'm going to let it completely dry. And this is what it looked like all dry, and I'm okay with it. I think that's going to look all right for the base for this project. I've got some watered down black acrylic paint. I was at the tail end of this bottle, and I'm just going to drip it all along the edges of this glass vase and just let it run all the way down. This is where it starts to get messy, so make sure you have something underneath to catch all of the drips. And I've just taken a little paintbrush and I'm just kind of spreading around that black acrylic paint and just evening it along the bottom. And as you can see, it's just kind of dripped down that whole vase, kind of spooky and eerie looking. And I'm just gonna layer on some fall kind of Halloween colors. I've got some green now, and because I've got the chalk paint on the base of the glass, I can put acrylic on top of that, and that will adhere really well. But don't use your acrylic to do your first base coat on the glass surface. And I'm just gonna, same thing, just drip this along the edge and just let it flow wherever it flows. And I know it looks like an awful mess right now, but when it's finished, you'll see how well it works. And just drip it along the sides wherever it falls, squeeze it hard in some places and then just lighter in others. Just let it flow down. And this is a great way to use up all of your scrap little bits of paint that you have laying around. And you can do any kind of theme, Halloween, Christmas, Easter, just mix and match those colors and it'll look fabulous. And there's the yellow all finished. Now I'm kind of letting the paint dry for maybe 5 or 10 minutes between each coat before I put the next one on, so the colors don't blend in together too much. And now I love this purple. I think it looks really like a Halloween, and just dripping it everywhere all over the vase. Now I'm just going to take my little paintbrush and just kind of blend that purple up to the base of the vase. I don't want any really clumpy bits at the base where it's going to sit. I want it to sit flat. So I'm just kind of blending it in with the paintbrush. This would be such a great DIY craft project to do with your kids too. They would love mucking in all of this paint. Okay, last color. I'm going to finish off with this orange, and I'm putting quite a bit on the base of the vase because I want it to cover the whole base. And I'm just kind of taking a small paintbrush, kind of pushing it along and just letting it drip wherever it goes along the side. I'm going to take the heat gun, and that will help kind of push it down a little bit too and make it drip a little bit better. And then I am going to just set it aside and let it dry completely overnight. Now you want to really carefully, once you've finished off this last coat, kind of move it out of the way of that puddle of paint that's on that cardboard, because you don't want it to dry in all of that puddle of paint. So just kind of move it as gently as you can without kind of ruining any of the drips, and then let it dry completely. Okay, I have this on a clean surface again. I got a little bit of black chalk paint, and I'm just putting it on a toothbrush, and I'm just kind of splattering black over the whole vase. And just here and there, globs and spots wherever, and that will kind of give it a little bit more of that eerie kind of Halloween feel. Okay, this is the next day. It's really dried really well, and I'm just taking a damp cloth and I'm just kind of cleaning along the top of that vase and taking off any little drips and stuff that might have happened when we were putting all that acrylic paint on, and just kind of cleaning it up and making it nice and neat. Now I'm going to take this outside and give it a really good top coat with this polyurethane. It'll seal it really well. And I ended up actually giving it 3 or 4 coats, and I wanted it to have kind of that real glossy feel. So this is a gloss finish. Now I needed something to put in the vase. I went into my backyard, got a bunch of dead branches, and I had some of this accent stone spray paint. I'm going to spray the branches with it. It just kind of gives it a pebbly texture, kind of lumps and bumps on it, and I thought it kind of gave it a spooky feel. So I'm just going to give it a good coat on both sides and then let them dry completely. And I had some old faux flowers laying around for forever, and I knew that they would work perfect for this project. And I want to give them more of a spooky feel, so I'm going to actually spray the flowers with some of this stone spray paint too. I've had these flowers in my shed for forever, and I knew I would use them for a project, and they worked out perfect for this one. All finished, and I love it, and it's definitely a one-of-a-kind piece. I've added the dead branches and the faux flowers, and I think the colors and everything complement each other. It kind of gives me the Beetlejuice feels. I'm spraying it with some spray paint that's meant for plastic. Make sure you're using that or it'll peel and chip off. Once that's completely dry, I can then put on my chalk paint on top of it once we have that first layer of spray paint. Gonna paint the whole container and then set it aside and let it dry. I'm going to put my homemade napkins on this container. I've taken 1 ply of a napkin, attached it to a piece of computer paper. I'm gonna send it through my printer, print on it. We have a custom made napkin. I'm gonna cut that napkin off of that piece of computer paper, and then I'm gonna put it on a page protector. You want to lay it down, facing down on that page protector, and then I like to make the edges ragged. It just makes it blend into your project better. Just using a little bit of water and a stiff paintbrush and removing some of that napkin. We're going to sprinkle on a little bit more water, making sure there's no wrinkles or no bubbles, get it laying nice and flat, and then take off any extra water. And we're going to put Mod Podge on the front of that peanut container once the paint's completely dried. Lay that napkin right where you want it. And the nice thing about this technique, if it's not exactly where you want it, you can pick it up and kind of move it around, opposed to just decoupaging it right on. And we now have our custom made napkin applied onto that plastic container. You can just take your fingers and just smooth it out a little bit if you need to. Now I want to put a knob on the top of the lid just to make it look a little bit more high end. I'm going to drill a hole through the middle of that lid and then just attach the knob. I have a little collection of knobs just for this purpose itself, and I can just root through it and pick out one that's suiting for the project. I had these wooden cutouts that I picked up at Dollarama for $2, and I'm going to add a few of them as embellishments to the front of this container. We're going to upcycle this olive oil container. The first thing that we need to do is take this spout off, and then I'm going to turn it upside down and spray it really well with some black spray paint. And before I sprayed it with the spray paint, I made sure I washed it really well, and I wiped it down with an alcohol wipe because we don't want any oil left on the jug. Now I'm painting it. Once that black spray paint has dried, I'm painting it with my orange homemade chalk paint. Now we're going to add a graphic to the front of that olive oil container. Using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, I printed this off on my LaserJet printer, and I am just going to push it right down exactly where I want it, get out any bubbles and wrinkles, and then we're going to let it sit for 24 hours. This is the next day. I've dampened it with some water, rubbed off all the paper, sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and now we're going to put a pumpkin stem on the top. This is just an old spindle that I had laying around, added some faux flowers and some twine, and that is an amazing upcycle from something right out of the recycling bin. Do these all on free wood that I find. I have friends that are home builders, and I have them save me the little cutoffs from the wood. You can also go to Home Depot. They have a section at the back where they cut the wood, where they put the cutoff ends that you can grab for free. Or check out wood piles of people that are going to burn them in their wood stove. Pull out what you can use to make these. I've painted these with my black homemade chalk paint, and then I took a pillar candle that I got from the dollar store, went all around the outside edges, and now I'm painting on top with some homemade orange chalk paint. Let it all dry, and when I sand it, it just brings up that natural wood underneath from where the candle wax was, and we have a really distressed piece of wood. We're going to do our Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. I printed this off on my LaserJet printer on regular computer paper. And this process will also work on an inkjet printer. So you don't need a Cricut. You don't need stencils. You can do this all at home on your computer and make these really affordable. The less you have to pay for supplies, the more money in your pocket when you can sell these items. I understand not everybody can find free wood, but if you can and you ask around, you'd be surprised what you can round up to turn into shelf sitters or signs. I let these sit for 24 hours, dampen the paper, rubbed off the paper. Now sometimes on a darker color, you'll see the outline of the Mod Podge a little bit. You can always go back in with that orange paint and blend it in. Now I just went to my backyard, I got some twigs, and I drilled a hole in the top of these pieces of wood, and I'm going to put a little bit of wood glue in there, stick those little branches in there so it looks like a stem from a pumpkin. Now I'm going to add an embellishment to the top. I had some raffia and some yarn and some flannel ribbon. Now the flannel ribbon, here's a little trick. I went to the thrift store, I found a flannel shirt for a couple dollars that had a stain on it. So I ripped it into strips. I had hordes of ribbon now. I had these 4 glass bottles. I've soaked off the label. They didn't come off completely clean, but that's okay because we're going to paint over them, and we're trying to get a really kind of vintage, antique, spooky feel to them. So I didn't put a lot of elbow grease into it. We're going to spray the glass with some primer. This is bin primer, and it will allow any type of paint that I put on this glass jar to adhere really well. I sprayed all 4 bottles. They're really completely covered, and now we're going to work on the first one. I have got some baking soda paint, and I let it dry after I covered it completely, and I've just got some of my coffee stain, and I'm going to stain that baking soda paint to give it that antique feel. letting it dry, and you can see it's kind of dribbled and I want it looking like it's stained and yucky. Now we're going to set it aside and let that dry while we get our label for this bottle ready. This label is from my Etsy store. It is a witch's brew poem, and we're going to age it too. Now I want the edges to be a little bit ragged, so I'm just ripping them, being really careful not to rip into the graphic all around the outside. And we're going to go back in with our coffee stain again. Coffee stain and Halloween go hand in hand. I certainly use a lot of it this time of year. I'm using a sponge, just going up and down over the paper, letting it pool a little bit here and there. And now my bottle is completely dry. I'm going in with some black acrylic paint, and I'm just flicking it here and there, and it's just going to add another level to that grubbiness. I think it's starting to come together really well, and I think we're ready to put the label on. I'm going to get my Mod Podge mat, and I'm going to put a coat first, again like we did in our other project, on top of it. It's going to prevent that ink from running if you're using an inkjet, or if you're just using a laser jet, it's going to seal it up, and I like that matte look. Once that was dry, I'm putting some Mod Podge on the back of the graphic, and we're going to add it to our bottle. And these graphics are also available in my Etsy store. I actually have a fall and Halloween bundle where you can pick up all of my favorite graphics. And to finish it off, I'm going to seal my whole bottle with that matte Mod Podge, and I'm going to go over that label again. I have some coffee stained cheesecloth, and I think that's going to finish off the top of this bottle really nice. I'm just going to use a little bit of twine. I'm going to coffee stain it to grub it up a little bit, and then I'm going to use it to tie that top of that cheesecloth onto the bottle. And here's our first finished bottle. Stick through because they get better as we go. I've got 3 more to do. Next fall decor project, I am mixing up a batch of homemade sand paint. I love using sand paint. It creates really fun texture on your projects. It gives it kind of a stone cement look. This was just a glass bowl that I picked up at the thrift store for a couple dollars, and it's going to turn out perfect. I'm going to put 1 full coat over the entire bowl, and you can already see the texture starting. Now when I put on the second and the third coat, I like to dab it on. I find it just creates even more texture. And now we've got those 3 coats on, we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. I haven't painted the inside of the bowl because we're going to put decor in it. So you can see the possibility of so many different projects that you can do with this sand paint, and especially in fall decor, you can do orange and you can do greens and yellows on vases and bowls and plates. Now I'm taking this outside after it's completely dry, and I'm going to seal it up with a polyurethane spray. I glued it on top of a black candle pillar holder that I had, pulled it all together, filled it up with some fall themed decor, up this votive holder. And it had some writing on it, but it was really in good shape and sturdy, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. It was $3.99, but I found it on the 75% off table, so it was a fantastic deal. Cleaned it all up, I painted it with some black chalk paint, let it dry completely, and then I went in and I painted it all with 2 coats of orange. Once the orange was dry, I took an 80 grit piece of sandpaper and I sanded all around the edges just to bring out that black paint from underneath and just give it that rustic feel. I always see these at the thrift store, so they're really easy to find, and when you see what I turn this into, you'll be looking for these the next time you head out to the thrift store. Now I'm going to put some jack-o'-lantern faces on this. I have this graphic in my Etsy store. It's 4 different jack-o'-lantern images. I'm using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. I've printed this off on my LaserJet printer on regular computer paper, let it sit overnight, and now I'm just dampening it with a damp rag and water and then rubbing off all the paper, and we're going to be left with really cute faces on each side of this votive holder. If you haven't experimented with this graphic transfer method, you need to give it a try because the projects that you can make with it are unbelievable. And there we have a really cute fall theme votive holder. To get my Mod Podge mat, and I'm going to put it all over that entire bottle. And then while it's still wet, I went out into my garden You know, when I'm trying to make that grubby surface, you guys know that I love my sand and my dirt. I got a bunch and I'm going to sprinkle it into that wet Mod Podge and get it completely covered. Set that aside, let it dry, and we're gonna work away on our label for this bottle. I've printed it off on my laser printer. Again, this graphic is available in my Etsy store. I love this one. I use it a lot throughout the Halloween season, and I had some of that coffee and paint mixture left over from our last bottle. I'm staining it, and we're going to now just set it aside and let it dry. I'm gonna go back in with that stain and dab it on top of the dirt that has dried on that bottle. This is the thing with these projects, especially Halloween. You can just get creative and just mix and match different techniques, and you'll really love the outcome that you can get with some of these. Putting the Mod Podge on top of that label, gonna let it dry, and then we're gonna attach it to that bottle. And this is a great way to save these glass bottles out of the recycling bin. By the time we're done these, it's hard to believe that it was just a plain glass bottle. And if you're going into a department store to buy decor like this, it is really expensive. So this is, number one, a lot more fun. Number two, it's affordable. Number three, it's original, and not everybody is gonna have it. I want to make a custom knob for the top of this bottle. So I'm using the lid that came off of it, and then I had a drawer pull that I'm using my E6000, and I'm going to glue it to the top, set it aside, let it dry, and then we're going to attach it to the top of the bottle. I've added a little bit of that cheesecloth to the top, putting on some hot glue to hold that lid down really tight, and I'm adding some moss. I picked up this whole bag of moss at the dollar store quite a while ago. It goes a long way. I add it to my projects every now and then, and putting on some E6000 onto the top of the lid to add it, adding some hot glue so it doesn't move around, and that finishes off this bottle. Glass bowl at the thrift store. It was really cheap, and I love the texture in it. It kind of gave me Halloween vibes. I sprayed it with some white spray paint, and then I found these napkins at the dollar store. I'm going to decoupage them onto this glass bowl. I'm taking it down to 1 ply and cutting it so it'll fit around the outside edge of the bowl. And then I'm going to apply my Mod Podge liberally over that whole bowl in sections, adding the napkin as we go along and making sure that we work it right into that pattern in the glass. Once it's completely dried, I'm taking an 80 grit sandpaper and I'm sanding off the edges of that napkin. It leaves a nice crisp line. And then I decided I wanted to put some around the bottom of it too. So I'm going to cut off a piece of that napkin and do the same process that I did before on the sides, just using the Mod Podge and making sure that it's pushed right down into that pattern on the glass so it is adhered well, letting it dry completely, and then sealing it up with some more Mod Podge. And we've created a really cute little dish to hold some Halloween goodies. I found this metal tray at the thrift store. It was on the 75% off table. I think it was like 25 cents. It's not silver, it's just metal. Cleaned it up really well, took the stickers off it, and then spray painted it with some black spray paint. When the black spray paint was dry, I painted it with my white homemade chalk paint. When that was dry, I took an 80 grit piece of sandpaper, sanded all around the edges, and then I added a Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer that says Hello Autumn. I let it sit for 24 hours, and then I rubbed the paper off with a little bit of water. And how cute was this upcycle? It was so easy to do, just a little tray and perfect to display. Now there's scrap wood Halloween DIY that sells really well. We're gonna do a different painting technique on this one, getting out our Elmer school glue. Using Elmer school glue creates a really fantastic chippy finish. You're going to spread that all over the piece of wood and don't let it dry. While it's still wet, in long strokes, brush that paint over top of that glue. And as it dries, you can use acrylic or latex paint. And as it dries, it's going to give you this fabulous crackle that I think looks great for the Halloween season. Again, we're just going to add a twig to the top of that. You can also use a dowel and seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. Now, I think this needs a little bit more of an embellishment, and that will also make them sell better than just having a block of wood that's painted. Added some ribbon and a little burlap bow to the front, and then I found these little plaques at the dollar store, and I thought it would be perfect to finish off this little scrap piece of wood. Painted it with some black chalk paint, some white chalk paint, distressed it a little bit, and then I'm also going to add a Happy Halloween graphic to the front of it using the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method again. Taking the time to add nice embellishments and graphics to these projects definitely helps them sell better. And I think this turned out spooktacular and would look perfect on a shelf for the fall season. Using scrap wood to create Halloween decor that sells really well. Painted this block of wood with some black chalk paint and then some white chalk paint. Now I picked up these Halloween themed napkins at the dollar store. We're going to rip them down to 1 ply, and then we're going to decoupage it onto that block of wood. Applying the Mod Podge mat just in a light coat, and then we're going to lay that napkin right on top of it and then smooth it out, making sure there's no bubbles and no wrinkles. And then we're going to apply just a light coat of that Mod Podge on top and then set it aside and let it dry. Once it's dry, I've taken it outside, given it a really good sanding. And again, we're going to add that twig in the top because I think that's an extra little step that makes them sell so much better. With a little bit of glue, add that twig to the top. And I'm going to paint this one with a little bit of green acrylic paint. Add some raffia to the top, and you've created another really cute shelf sitter that's going to sell really well. So all of these signs that you're seeing right here, I have made for free, other than a little bit of a cost of the paint and the embellishments. And that means when you sell them, you can put more money in your pocket. It was already black, but I want to make it even more spooky. And I had this pillar candle that I picked up at the dollar store. I'm going to incorporate that into this project. Now, if you want to create some faux rust, this is a great tip. Get some Mod Podge and just dab a little bit on wherever you think it would have naturally aged or naturally rusted. Just dab it on here and there. And then while it's still wet, you're going to take your cinnamon and you're going to sprinkle it right into that Mod Podge. And then you're going to set it aside and let it dry. Now we're going to customize a candle. I made my own napkin, but you can basically make any of your own custom napkins. I printed this off on my LaserJet printer, and we're going to add it onto that pillar candle. We're going to get some wax paper, and with the waxy side, we're going to wrap it really tightly around that candle, bunch it up at the back, and then we're going to use our heat gun, and we're going to apply heat to that napkin and candle. And as the wax melts, that napkin is also going to melt right into that candle. If you don't have a heat gun, you can also use a hair dryer and just have it on the highest setting. You'll be able to tell when it's finished because the wax will have soaked right through to that napkin. Peel away the wax paper and you're left with a spooky graphic on your candle. I've made these candles before, and I've had some people concerned about whether the napkin would catch fire as it burned down. I've never had that issue, but here's a way to solve that. Burn the candle down until you can get a votive right in the top of it, and then you can just replace the votive, and you'll never use up that candle also, and it'll last a long time. I've let the Mod Podge dry, and I'm just wiping away any of that extra cinnamon, and as we do that, it's going to leave a really rusty look. Then I'm going to seal it up with some matte polyacrylic sealer. So we've taken that black plain candlestick and made it look rusty and old. I also had this mason jar lid, and I am going to just use my Gorilla Glue and glue it on the top. And this is what I created. wood that I've painted with some black and white homemade chalk paint and a bat that I found at a yard sale this summer. I really distressed both pieces with some 80 grit sandpaper, making it look old and spooky. And I'm gonna take some of my green acrylic paint and I'm just gonna flick it everywhere on top of that sign, just so it looks like it's chippy and old. I'm going to put a graphic on this using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. Printed this off on my LaserJet printer, making sure to reverse the text, and we're going to use a Mod Podge mat. Putting a light coat over that whole piece of computer paper, going to center it where I want it on the sign, and then set it aside and let it dry for 24 hours. After the 24 hours, we're going to dampen it with a little bit of water, rub off all of that paper, and we're going to be left with a spooky graphic on our sign. Now I want it to go in, and those little drips of blood, I've taken my acrylic paint and I'm just painting on any of those drips with the red paint and just making it look like it's drippy and gory. I went through my stash and I found this old spring, not even sure what it was off of, but it's going to work perfect for this sign. I have these little staples. I'm going to put one on each end of the sign, and then I'm going to wire that spring on the top so it creates a really fun hanger for this sign. So here's our before, and here is what I created. Other candle. I had both of these in my stash for a long time, but I knew I could transform them into something really spooky for Halloween. Gonna mix up some baking soda paint and apply it all over that candlestick holder. Once it's almost dry, I'm gonna roll it in mud. Just roll it so it gets in all those little nooks and crannies and push it right in so it looks grubby and dirty. And then I'm going to set it aside and let it dry. Now I'm going to go in with some gold metallic paint, some acrylic paint that I picked up at Michael's, and I'm just going to dab it here and there, almost like a dry brush, on any high areas where it was raised on the candlestick. Not adding very much, just a little bit here and there. Then I'm going to set it aside, let it dry completely, and then I'm going to seal it up with some matte clear polyacrylic sealer. I've put the taper candle in the candlestick holder, and now I've taken another votive and I'm lighting it. And what I'm going to do is, as everything is burning down and melting, I'm going to melt some more wax so it drips down that candle, so it gives that old, really antique look to that candle, as if it's burned forever and just dripped all over the place. And just be really careful doing this process. We don't want to burn ourselves or get any hot wax on us. And I'm just rotating the candle around so it's dripping everywhere. So here's our before, and here is what I created. Any scrap bits and pieces of wood, because they can all be turned into signs. This is just a scrap piece of plywood that I found in the burn pile. Brought it home. I'm going to turn it into a fabulous Halloween sign. I painted the base of the piece of wood with some black homemade chalk paint, and then I got out my acrylic paint and I added some green. I let it dry, and then I added some orange. And I'm not making sure that I'm getting that whole board covered. I want to create an old, scary looking piece of wood that looks like it's been around forever. Now this is salt. This is actually pickling salt, but you can use any type of salt. And I'm sprinkling it into that orange paint. And then when it was completely dry, I went over it with my white homemade chalk paint. We're creating a really chippy texture on this piece of wood with these techniques. There's never really any right or wrong way to do these techniques. We're just looking for a scrap piece of wood that looks like it's been weathered and outside forever. Now I've gotten out my scraper after everything was dry, and I'm scraping away that salt, and any of that paint color that was underneath the salt is going to be revealed. And then I went in with my 80 grit sandpaper and I went all around the edges to distress it even more. We're slowly getting there, but I'm not quite happy yet. I had just some, actually this is old paint water, and I'm spreading it over that whole sign and right to the edge of the wood. And then I've got my instant coffee, and I'm going to sprinkle that into that paint water and it's going to start to melt. This is going to be a really great base to make our Halloween sign on. Instant coffee is one of my favorite things to have in my craft room. There's so many different ways that you can use it. You can antique paper with it. You can use it as a stain, or here you can see I'm using it to age my wood even more. Once it was completely dry and that instant coffee had melted into that water, I went back with that scraper again and scraped it all down. Now let's get ready to put these graphics on our sign. I printed these off on my laser printer and I made sure that I reversed those images, because when you're doing this technique, if you don't, all your letters are going to be backwards. I used my Mod Podge mat. I let it sit for 24 hours, and after it had dried, I've got a little dish of water and I'm just dampening that paper so you can just start to see the graphics show through, and then rubbing off that paper. So here's where we ran into some problems because I wasn't thinking ahead. I put that instant coffee on that piece of wood. Well, as soon as I put the water on those graphics to rub it off, of course, it reactivated that instant coffee and it rubbed off wherever there wasn't any of those Mod Podge graphics. But I put my thinking cap on and I thought I can make this work. I'm going to be very determined and I'm not going to start again. So I took the edge of my scissors and I just started scraping away around the edges to blend it in a little bit, and it actually worked really well. It got rid of those really obvious straight lines that I'd created when I was rubbing off the graphic. And as I was blending it in, it just kind of gave it more of a grubby feel. So this was a win. I didn't think I was going to be able to make it work, but in the end, after a little bit of patience and a little bit of just elbow grease, it was coming together really nicely. Once I blended in all of that instant coffee mess, I was really happy with it, but I think it needed a few embellishments at the top and the bottom. I had these pieces of wood hanging around for a long time, and I'm just going to add them to the top and the bottom. I thought it needed a little bit of black chalk paint, so I painted them up, and then I'm going to just put a little bit of glue on the back of them and nail them onto the sign. I think this turned out pretty spooktacular for a scrap piece of wood that was destined for the dump. Are doing these complete sign from start to finish because we have a 24-hour wait period for our graphics to dry after we put on our Mod Podge graphics. So we're just doing it step by step here. And this is done on a piece of old scrap plywood. I gave it a really chippy paint finish with some black chalk paint, and then I put on some Vaseline, and then I put on some orange acrylic paint, and then I put on some salt, and then I waited for everything to dry, put on some green acrylic paint, sprinkled in some salt while it was still wet, let that dry, and then I put some white chalk paint on top, scraped it all off. So as we're working away on this sign, you're going to see that canvas underneath of my paint show up through the sign. And all of these techniques, I have full tutorials on my channel, so you can see how to do them. So we've kind of hopped right through to the taking off the paper portion of making a wooden sign with Mod Podge. And this is all that I use. Mod Podge mat. I printed off my graphics. So this is the graphic that I used. Farm Fresh Pumpkins. This is available in my Etsy store. So it's a Farm Fresh Pumpkins. And what I did, I put this in my Google Docs and I sized it to fit my piece of wood. Made sure I used my reverse file because when you're doing this technique, you want to make sure you're reversing your files. Placed it where I wanted it, added the Mod Podge, and then I let it sit overnight. This is just regular computer paper that I printed on with my laser printer. It will also work on a inkjet printer, but it's much easier if you have a laser printer. It's not as much work. Now I glued these together, because sometimes I just do this by the seat of my pants and I don't take my time and measure very well. So by taping these together, I know my words are going to be where they need to be. So we're just going to rip that tape off. This is just some packing tape that I used when I was putting these graphics together. And I designed all of these graphics myself, the ones that are in my Etsy store. I love designing graphics. It is so much fun and I find it really relaxing. I'll sit on the couch, put a YouTube video on of some of my favorite crafting friends, and just design away and make graphics, and I have a lot of fun doing that. A dish of water and a little rag. That's all you need. Take the rag. I like to start in the middle of the graphic. Just wet it so you can start to see the graphics show through. And this is the cheapest computer paper you can buy. This is just the Amazon basic computer paper. If you're using a computer paper that's really thick, it's going to be really difficult to rub off, and it's just extra paper that you have to rub off. So find the cheapest paper that you can and it'll work the best for you. One of the best things to do is if you follow me over on Instagram or Facebook, you can send me pictures over there. So if you're having an issue with this technique and you send me a picture of it, I can look at it and within 2 or 3 seconds, I usually know where it went wrong and I can guide you through it. A really easy technique that you don't have to spend a lot of money on to make signs. And I sell a lot of these. You don't need to have a Cricut. You don't need to have stencils. All you need is a computer, some computer paper, Mod Podge, and a printer. And most people already have a computer and they already have a printer. Head to Amazon or head to a craft store, pick up some Mod Podge and try this technique and just kind of give it a go. Now this technique is never ever perfect. It's always something that's going to be a very rustic look. It's almost like a farmhouse kind of vintage or antique looking sign. If you're looking for something to be perfect, this is not going to be the technique for you. This is going to be, there's going to be, like you can see here, little pieces that are going to rub off here and there. And, but I think that's what gives it character. That's what I like so much about this technique is that rustic feel. Now you can see I'm not using my little rag anymore. I'm just dipping my finger in the water and just doing a small section and rubbing that paper off now as we go. How many of you have tried this? Let me know in the comments. Have you tried this technique and have you had success or not? And also, if you've made some signs, tag me in your Instagram stories or your Facebook, and then I can see them if you tag me. When I'm doing a technique tutorial or a teaching tutorial, it doesn't help very much if I'm teaching you and then you're having a problem and all of a sudden I'm gone. You don't know, you can't, I'm nowhere to be found. I've put this video out into the universe and you can't make it work and I'm long gone. I don't think that's very fair. So I really, really try to guide people along if they want to try this technique and to help them out, because that's what I'm all about. And if I can help you figure this out and you can start making signs and you can start making some money on the side or gifts for family or friends or have a craft night with your girlfriends. I want to make sure that you're not going to have any issues with it and you can do it and have fun with it. So my big thing on my channel is to be very supportive with my followers, and it's nice when I get those replies because I know that I'm doing a pretty good job, trying anyways, and I get hundreds and hundreds of messages because I have very big platforms on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So Facebook's a little bit harder to get through because there's a lot of messages that come through there. So if you want to get a faster reply, probably Instagram or YouTube are my two easiest platforms to get a hold of me the quickest. So as I'm rubbing away, you can see that painted background now underneath the sign, and you can see how I kind of made that chippy base of the sign, and it's showing through underneath the graphics. I really like taking a little bit of extra time to do a different kind of painting technique when I'm making my signs, especially if you're going to sell them, because they're going to sell better. I just find it doesn't have a lot of character, so I always take an extra half an hour or so waiting for paint to dry, etc. When I'm making a sign, especially if I'm making a big one, do some special painting techniques on it first and then make it into a sign, and I think it looks much better. One of my most popular fall and Halloween DIYs from this year and last year was I took some 2x4s and I cut them into squares about this big, painted them with some orange chalk paint, and then added my jack-o'-lantern faces. They're so adorable and they're so easy to make, and most of the time they're just scrap 2x4s that I have gotten. That's a really great DIY to do for this time of year. So if you haven't seen that video, you can go back in my playlists and you can find it, and it's a lot of fun. And the jack-o'-lantern faces are in my Etsy store too. If you are a Patreon member of my graphics club, you have a 70% off discount code, and if you're a channel member, you have your 50% off discount code. So if you're buying something out of my Etsy store, make sure you're using those codes because it really helps out with the cost of graphics. I'm going to start up here on the farm fresh. There we go. And just rub the paper off. This is where I mean about it being rustic. So see how I lost that little bit of the bottom of the F right there? That happens. That just happens. There's nothing, you haven't done anything wrong. That's just the nature of this technique and what gives it the rustic look. But I also was using the little rag, and sometimes it's just a little bit too aggressive and you can't feel how hard you're rubbing. So that could have also been the reason too. I couldn't feel right there, and I rubbed it a bit too hard, and then I lifted the graphic off. So just be careful if you're using the rag for that top layer. I always stick to my fingers, and now with my fingers I can feel the paper balling up underneath, so I know if I've got, like when I rub right here, there's no paper. I can feel it's all gone. I'm up here, I can still feel that there's paper underneath my finger and that I need to keep rubbing. If you're using a inkjet, you can still do this technique. You just have to be really careful with not using much water. When you're using an inkjet and you're introducing water onto the inkjet ink, it has a tendency to want to run. So you have to be really careful, almost do like a dry rub on it. It's not perfect. And if you're going to be making these signs to sell, it takes a lot longer. It might be worthwhile in investing in a laser printer. If you're turning this into a business, it's a really good investment. So if you want to do a lot of these signs and using this technique, invest in a laser printer. It'll be so much better for you. We're doing pretty good here. And I'm gonna just keep working away here, and you guys can keep watching. I hope you don't get bored. because like I said before, I think it's really good for you to see me in real time doing this technique and seeing how long it actually takes to do it. Now, after this is done, I actually, out in my shed, I cut some wooden pieces to go around the outside. So once I have this all done, I'm going to take this outside. I'll nail it on. Now this little letter is wanting to lift on me a little bit, so I'm going to be really gentle on it. It's just wanting to lift up a little bit there. So I'm going to go really lightly there. That's pretty good with a light finger, so we don't take any more off. There, that looks good. I could just take this, I could coffee stain it, I could decoupage it, I could just frame it. But if you're doing this technique, you have to reverse it. And so this is not reversed. If I was going to use this, it would have to be the reverse file and then put it down on our piece of wood. If you're buying this graphic out of my Etsy store, one of the files is already reversed. So you don't need to worry about that. You already have your reverse file there. If you're designing your own graphics, make sure that you know how to reverse them, because you don't want to make one of these signs and forget to reverse them and then waste all of your time. Sometimes what happens when you're doing this technique, people will say, I can see the outline of where I put the graphic. The first thing that probably has happened is you've used too much Mod Podge. If you have used too much Mod Podge is thick. As you can see, it's a thick substance. So when you're putting it on your sign, and if you're putting a thick layer on it, letting it dry, when you're rubbing it off, you're going to have that thick outline all the way around your graphic. You do not need to use very much Mod Podge at all. You just need a really thin coat on your paper and then lay it down. And I think that will help you get rid of that paper edge look. The other thing is, if you're not using a white background, see now I've got another piece here that rubbed off a little bit. That's okay. That happens with this technique. Another thing is, if you're not using a white background, you're going to be able to see the outline of the graphic more, because Mod Podge does not dry completely clear. It has like an opaque dryness to it when it's finished. So if you say you're doing it on an orange background, you're going to see that opaque Mod Podge dried on top of that orange. And it just doesn't work that well. So if you're just beginning, I always recommend to do a white chalk paint background. And then that way it's going to blend into your sign better. As you get more advanced and doing more signs, then you can venture into using some colored backgrounds, because you just get the feel of rubbing and how much Mod Podge to use, and that will help you. But in the beginning, use a white background, and that will also help get rid of that outline. It 100% works best with chalk paint. It does not work well at all with latex paint. It will work with acrylic paint, but it's a little bit more tricky. But if you don't want to have any problems, you're best to stick with a chalk painted surface. So the chalk paint is porous, and when you're putting on the Mod Podge, you want that Mod Podge to soak into that chalk paint to do the transfer. If you're using a latex paint, that Mod Podge is just going to sit on top of that latex paint, because latex paint is latex, and you're not going to get a good transfer. You're going to rub the graphic right off. Acrylic paint, I'm not quite sure why it doesn't work as well with acrylic paint, but it does work better than the latex paint. If you're doing this, use a chalk paint. And I have a really affordable chalk paint recipe on my channel, if you haven't gotten any chalk paint, that you can try, and it works great with this technique. Now here's another piece. You can see right, so here's the issue that I did right here. And I might save this and I'll add it later. I probably missed this little portion with Mod Podge when I put it on the sign. And actually, it doesn't even look that bad. I probably don't need to add it in here. But when it's along the edge like that, it usually means that I didn't get enough Mod Podge right out to the edge of the paper to do the transfer. But I'll set that aside, and I might add that later. I can just go back in and put a little bit of Mod Podge on that little piece right there, place it back down, and then let it sit and dry, and then rub the paper off. But I don't think it actually looks too bad. You can definitely use colored ink. I just don't have a colored laser printer. I'm actually in the market for one. I've been looking for one. When I find one and I know it's going to work really well, I'll give you some recommendations. But right now, I just have my black ink laser printer. And if I'm going to do anything color, then I do have an inkjet printer. So I'll go and I'll use my inkjet for any color. But definitely it will work for color if you have the laser color printer. This P here is giving me trouble. So I'm just going very lightly because I don't want to lose any more of that. Now you can go in with a paint marker or a little bit of black acrylic paint and you can touch it up, but I always find it doesn't really blend in that well. You can tell that it's been painted on top of it. So I try to avoid that as much as I can. But we're pretty close to having this done. So now I'm just going to go around and just see if I've got any places where I missed. I've got it cleaned up pretty good. So my next step now, I'll do it off camera, we'll wrap this up soon, is I will seal this with a water-based polyacrylic sealer. You can seal your signs with Mod Podge. It's not my preference. I find I don't like the look of Mod Podge as a top coat. I prefer a polyacrylic sealer. And if you have a little bit of cloudiness that's still left, when you introduce that polyacrylic sealer on top of it, a lot of that will go away and it will blend in and you won't see a lot of that cloudiness. Now I was able to get a lot of it off. As it dries, that cloudiness shows up and you can just go in and spot rub here and there where you need to. So now I can take my hand and I can feel, I think I got this pretty clean. I don't feel much paper anymore. So what do you guys think? I love this graphic. So we've taken this, enlarged it, reversed it, turned it into this, and we've turned it into a really beautiful fall sign.